Atlanta, Georgia, March 1971. A martial arts gym in the downtown area. Chuck Norris walks through the door to visit a fellow instructor when the gym owner looks at him and says, "We don't train Orientals here. This is an American martial arts school." What happens in the next 20 minutes doesn't end with violence or anger. It ends with understanding, transformation, and proof that dignity in the face of ignorance is more powerful than fury, that education beats confrontation, and that sometimes the people most wrong are just waiting for someone patient enough to show them the truth. The gym is called American Combat Arts. Located on the second floor of a brick building, corner of Peachtree and 5th Street. Accessible by a narrow staircase, walls painted institutional green, the kind of space that prioritizes function over aesthetics. At the top of the stairs, a door with frosted glass reading ACA Real American Fighting. The emphasis on American is intentional, a statement of identity in a time when martial arts is still seen by many as foreign, exotic, potentially un-American. Inside, the gym is basic. Concrete floors covered in worn canvas, heavy bags hanging from exposed ceiling beams, makuwara boards mounted to support columns, a small ring area marked by duct tape on the floor. The walls display American flags, military service plaques, newspaper clippings about American soldiers training in hand-to-hand combat. The message is clear. This gym teaches American warriors American fighting, not foreign techniques, not Oriental mysticism, but practical combat for red-blooded American men. It's 11 a.m. on a Thursday. The gym is mostly empty, just the owner and 2 students working heavy bags in the corner. Chuck is in Atlanta for a martial arts demonstration at a local college, invited by Professor James Wilson, who teaches physical education and runs a small martial arts club on campus. Professor Wilson mentioned his friend Tom Drake runs a gym downtown, suggested Chuck stop by, said Tom's a former Marine who teaches practical self-defense. Might be interesting for Chuck to meet another instructor, compare approaches. Chuck pushes through the door. He's 31 years old, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, no martial arts uniform, no indication of his skills or achievements, just a man visiting a gym out of professional courtesy. His appearance, like always, triggers assumptions. His face shows his heritage, Irish, German, Cherokee from his father's side, mixed with his mother's Irish Cherokee background. His features could read as Asian to people who make quick judgments, who see what they expect to see rather than what's actually there. Tom Drake is behind a desk in the corner, 40s, built like a bulldog, thick neck, powerful shoulders, crew-cut hair, tattoo on his forearm saying USMC Semper Fi. He's working on paperwork, membership forms, gym accounts, the boring administrative work that comes with running a business. He looks up when Chuck enters, his expression shifting immediately from neutral to suspicious, that particular hardness that comes from preconceived notions meeting perceived confirmation. Tom stands, walks around the desk, positions himself between Chuck and the rest of the gym, body language clearly territorial. He says, flat tone, no warmth, "Can I help you?" Chuck says politely, "I'm Chuck Norris. Professor Wilson suggested I stop by. Said you run a good gym. Thought we might exchange ideas about training methods." Tom's expression doesn't soften. He says, "Professor Wilson didn't mention you were Oriental." Chuck pauses, processes the comment, recognizes the assumption and the prejudice beneath it. He says calmly, "I'm not Oriental. I'm American, born in Oklahoma, but I do practice martial arts, if that's what you're concerned about." Tom crosses his arms, says, "Look, no offense, but this is an American martial arts school. We teach American fighting methods. We don't do that Oriental stuff, that kata nonsense, that bowing and mysticism garbage. We teach real combat, the kind that works in real fights against real men. I don't think we'd have much to exchange ideas about." The 2 students working the bags have stopped, turned to watch, sensing confrontation, curious how this will resolve. Chuck could react multiple ways, could get angry at the racism, at being dismissed, at the insult to his heritage and his art, could prove his skill physically, demonstrate that Oriental stuff works just fine against American fighting, could leave, refuse to engage with someone so closed-minded, so prejudiced, so certain of his superiority. But Chuck chooses different. He chooses education. He chooses patience. He chooses to see this not as an insult but as an opportunity to challenge assumptions through calm demonstration of truth. Chuck says, still polite, "I respect your background as a Marine." Thank you for your service. I served in the Air Force, stationed in Korea, learned Tang Soo Do there. I don't practice kata for mysticism. I practice technique because it works. I've competed professionally, won multiple championships not through mysticism, but through effective application of principles. I'd be happy to demonstrate if you're interested. Not to prove anything, just to show you that good technique is good technique regardless of where it originated. Tom looks surprised by Chuck's calm response. Expected anger or defensiveness, received neither. He says, uncertain now. You served. Chuck says, 4 years. Military police. Honorable discharge. Tom's demeanor shifts slightly. Military service creates common ground, shared experience that transcends other differences. Tom says, less hostile but still skeptical. Okay, show me this Oriental, this Tang Soo Do. Show me what makes it work. Chuck asks, may I use your heavy bag? Tom gestures permission. Chuck walks to the nearest bag, 100-pound Everlast hanging from a chain, standard training equipment. He doesn't warm up, doesn't stretch ostentatiously, just stands before the bag, breathing calm, then executes a simple side kick. The technique is perfect. His foot strikes the bag dead center. The bag doesn't swing wildly, doesn't bounce back violently. It shoots straight backward, chain going slack at the top of the arc, taking 6 full seconds to stop moving. The sound is deep, solid, the impact of efficiency rather than wasted force. Tom's eyebrows raise. That's real power, not mystical, not fake, just physics properly applied. Chuck steps back, says that's a basic kick, nothing mystical, just understanding how to generate force from the ground through the hips into the target. The principles are the same whether you call it Tang Soo Do or American fighting. Power generation is power generation. Tom walks to the bag, touches it, feels the heat from the impact point, says that's real technique. How long did that take to develop? Chuck says 10 years of consistent practice, tens of thousands of repetitions, same dedication any Marine gives to mastering his rifle, any soldier gives to his craft. Discipline, repetition, understanding, application, nothing mystical, just work. Tom nods slowly, processing, assumptions cracking. Chuck continues, can I ask you something? What made you decide Oriental martial arts are ineffective? Have you trained in any Asian systems yourself? Tom says honestly, no, I've seen some of these karate demonstrations, guys breaking boards and doing forms. Looks like dancing, doesn't look like real fighting. I fought in Vietnam, real combat, life or death. That kata stuff wouldn't work there. Chuck says, you're right that not all training translates to real combat. Demonstrations and forms can be performance rather than practical, but that's true of any martial art, including American boxing or wrestling. Poor training is poor training regardless of origin. Good training is good training regardless of origin. The question isn't whether it's American or Oriental. The question is whether it's effective or ineffective. And effectiveness comes from how you train, not where the technique originated. Tom is quiet, thinking. One of his students, a young guy maybe 20, says, Mr. Drake, can he show us more? I want to see what real Oriental Asian martial arts looks like. Tom looks at Chuck, says, would you mind giving a short demonstration? Not performance, just practical technique. Show us what you actually use in real situations. Chuck agrees. For the next 15 minutes, he demonstrates practical applications, shows joint locks that control without destroying, shows takedowns that use minimal force for maximum effect, shows strikes to vulnerable targets that end confrontations quickly, explains the principles behind each technique, the body mechanics, the leverage, the timing. No mysticism, no philosophy, just clear technical instruction that any fighter can understand and appreciate. The students are fascinated. They ask questions. Why that angle instead of another? How does that lock prevent escape? What happens if the opponent counters this way? Chuck answers each question clearly, demonstrates variations, acknowledges limitations of techniques, never claims his art is superior, just explains why certain approaches work in certain contexts. Tom watches quietly, arms no longer crossed, posture no longer defensive, just observing, learning, reassessing his assumptions. When Chuck finishes, Tom says, that's not what I expected. I thought it would be a bunch of flowery moves and spiritual talk. This is practical. This is real. Chuck says, that's because I teach it practically. Some instructors emphasize the spiritual or philosophical aspects. I emphasize the technical and functional aspects. Both approaches are valid, but I focus on what works because that's what interested me when I learned. Tom says, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on ignorance. I called your art Oriental like it was an insult.
dismissed you because of how you look, assumed your methods were inferior without ever examining them. That was wrong. I was wrong. Chuck says, I appreciate that. Everyone has blind spots. Everyone makes assumptions. What matters is whether we're willing to examine them when they're challenged. You were willing to watch, to listen, to reconsider. That takes integrity. Tom says, would you be willing to come back? Teach my students some of what you showed today? I can pay you for your time. Chuck says, I don't need payment. I'm happy to share knowledge, but I have a request. Drop American from your gym name. Not because being American is wrong, but because good martial arts transcends nationality. What you teach is good because it's effective, not because it's American. What I teach is good because it's effective, not because it's Asian. Let's just focus on effectiveness rather than origin. Tom considers this. His gym name, his brand, his identity wrapped up in that word American, in drawing that line, in claiming that distinction. But he sees Chuck's point. The best techniques don't belong to one country or one culture. They belong to anyone willing to learn them properly. Tom says, combat arts, just combat arts. I'll change the sign. Chuck says, I'll help you take it down if you'd like. They do. That afternoon, Tom and Chuck remove the American from the frosted glass door. The sign now reads, CA, Real Fighting. Tom keeps his American flags, keeps his military plaques, keeps his pride in his service, but he drops the insistence that only American methods matter, opens himself to learning from other sources, other teachers, other traditions. Chuck returns to Atlanta 3 times over the next year, teaching seminars at Tom's gym. Tom's students learn Tang Soo Do techniques alongside their American boxing and wrestling. They learn that integration creates completeness, that drawing only from one source limits development, that the best fighters study everything effective regardless of origin. Tom himself trains with Chuck, earning a blue belt in Tang Soo Do, incorporating Asian techniques into his teaching, telling students about the day he dismissed Chuck Norris as Oriental, and Chuck responded not with anger but with patience, not with proving superiority but with sharing knowledge. Years later, Tom's gym becomes known as one of the most integrated martial arts schools in Atlanta, teaching boxing, wrestling, judo, karate, Tang Soo Do, whatever works. When people ask Tom about his philosophy, he tells them about March 1971, about Chuck Norris walking through his door, about how Tom almost turned away one of the best instructors he ever met because of prejudice, about how Chuck could have responded with anger or arrogance, but instead chose education. Tom says, Chuck taught me that real strength isn't proving you're better. Real strength is helping others become better. He could have humiliated me for my racism. Instead, he educated me. That's the difference between a fighter and a teacher. A fighter proves himself. A teacher helps others improve. Chuck was both, but he chose teacher that day. And that choice changed my gym, my students and me. In 1985, Tom Drake attends one of Chuck's film premieres in Atlanta, brings his whole school, 30 students, all wearing combat arts t-shirts. After the film, Chuck comes out to greet the audience, sees Tom, walks directly to him, hugs him, introduces him to other attendees as one of the best instructors in Georgia, a man who had the courage to change his mind and the integrity to act on that change. Tom tears up, tells Chuck, you saved me from myself. I was becoming bitter, closed-minded, limited by my own prejudice. You showed me a bigger world. So here's the question. Who have you dismissed because they don't match your expectations? What knowledge are you refusing because it comes from an unexpected source? Where is your prejudice limiting your growth? Because Tom Drake almost missed learning from Chuck Norris because of racism, because of assumptions, because of that word Oriental used as a dismissal instead of a description. 20 minutes changed everything. Not through anger, not through proving superiority, not through humiliation, but through patience, through demonstration, through education. Chuck could have walked away. Instead, he stayed and taught. And that choice rippled through decades, through hundreds of students, through a gym that changed from closed to open, from limited to integrated, from prejudiced to welcoming. What will your choice create when someone dismisses you? Will you respond with anger or with education? Because one builds walls, the other builds bridges, and bridges last longer.